Ritual. Coincidentally, it was also mentioned with charcoal and chalk. I said, okay, there was another material. I got to look up what that material is made of. And lo and behold, I looked it up, and I found out that clay does indeed contain alumina, silica, and ferric oxides. Do you see the building blocks coming together here? OPC needs lime, alumina, silica, and ferric oxides. I can create all of this by the materials that I have and a little knowledge in proper application. But there's another step. You just don't mix it all together. What you've got to do is you've got to take the lime once it's processed, and you've got to mix it in with the clay. And once you mix them up, you then have to heat them up again. You got to heat them up until they are glowing red hot. And once they're red hot, it's called clinker. That's the material that this is now called once it's heated up and it's red hot. Of course, you got to cool it down. When you cool it down, what you've got is what is called cool clinker. What do you do with the cool clinker? Well, if you've ever worked with cement, you realize that you don't get these blocks in the bag. What you have is something called powder. And you got to grind the clinker up. And what happens is this material goes into a vat and starts grinding, and you wind up with a powder. And once you have the powder, then what you do is you add water very judiciously to the mix, along with aggregate, and bingo, you have your cement. Is this cool or what? You liking what you're hearing? Masonic cement. Not just for breakfast anymore. Okay, then you've got to go through some curing steps, but I'm not going to go into that tonight. So you got chalk, charcoal, and clay. These are working materials. Now, we know we have working tools. We also have working materials. These are 3 working materials that we are introduced to in our very first degree. And in that degree, we're told they represent something symbolically. Now, if you recall what they represent freedom, fervency, and zeal. Now, you're probably asking, Coach, where are you going with this? Now we know how to make Masonic cement, why are you now going back into ritual? Well, I have a method to my madness here. Let me tell you that you have all these working materials by the time that you get done with your first degree. But you may not realize that you were given these working materials at the end of the first degree. You may not realize it at first. But these 3 working materials are symbolically presented to you in very careful allegory. And I'm going to get into that tonight. Why? Because I want you to realize that you have all the working materials within yourself right now to make Masonic cement. That's cement of brotherly love and affection. And what I want to do is make sure that you have the best made cement possible, so that when you leave this room, if you don't, you'll know exactly what you need to do to make your batch up, if you don't already have enough of it to go around. Freedom is all about choice. In fact, if you cannot choose, you are not free. But what is one of the requirements that every single person coming through that west gate, the inner door, must have in order to get through it? One of the prerequisites is they must be free. They cannot be bound in any way, shape, or form, preventing them from choosing. They come in that door with
their own free will.
Chalk. You come in with chalk. In fact, you cannot come in that door unless you have come in on your own free will and accord. Thank you, Brother Michael. You come in with chalk. And as you come in with chalk, you stroll around, and eventually you're given an opportunity. You're given an opportunity to commit yourself to what you supposedly freely chose upon yourself. There's one thing opening the door and walking through. It's another thing to sitting down and obligating yourself. That obligation is a commitment. Now, where did you get zeal and commitment connected? This just absolutely eluded me, because when I looked up fervency, it said zeal. It's like synonymous, and I said, no, there's a hidden meaning here. There's something that is masked that is not so obvious. So I started looking up the word, and I started looking up the root, and lo and behold, I found something that was extremely interesting, at least to me. The word zeal comes from back about 2,000 years ago. There were 4 religious sects in the Mediterranean at that time, in the southeast quadrant specifically. And those 4 religious sects, did I say 3 or 4? I did say 4, great. I'm ahead of myself. There's 4 sects at that time, 2,000 years ago. The first one was the Sadducees. You all recall that name? Yes? And the next one was the Pharisees. And there was a third one that supposedly a very wise, well-known person was part of, called the Essenes. And there was a fourth one. And the fourth one were called the Zealots. The Zealots were known for something profound. When they obligated themselves to something, nothing would get in their way whatsoever. If they made a commitment, you can guarantee that it was going to get done. And from the word zealot came zealous and zeal. And when you have zeal, basically you're committed, you're obligated. Well, what is one of the things that happens to us when we come in the very first time? We're given an opportunity to obligate ourselves, right? Well, there's our clay. So we come in with chalk. And very soon after we come in, we have something called clay. That is now, if the obligation is true, we have our clay. We got 2 ingredients in Masonic cement. Well, what's left? Fervency. And that's all about work. The one thing that I have discovered about charcoal when it comes to processing Masonic cement, you're not going to get anywhere unless it's ignited. How do you ignite charcoal? Well, the only way that that charcoal is ever going to get ignited, if that choice was true and the obligation was real. Without those two, the charcoal is never going to be ignited because there is no spark. I'm not going to get into too much of the work, but I'm going to get enough so that you're going to be overwhelmed by the time I get done. So I'm just going to give you enough for that overwhelming feeling. The ramifications of this is as follows. If you've got the 3 materials in your possession as a consequence of what your brothers gave you, which was an opportunity during that first degree, you came in authentically, and your obligation was authentic, the spark ignited the charcoal, and all you had to do is start flaming that stuff up and learning how to mix it properly. Let's start talking about the work. And by the way, if you do not do the work properly, you don't put these ingredients together properly, you don't make cement, you make what is called trumpery. Now, for those of you who don't know what the word trumpery is, the word trumpery is nonsense, garbage, Rubbish. Now, some of you might recognize that word, some of you may not. I'll tell you this, rubbish is garbage. And if you don't know how to put these materials together properly, that's what you'll wind up with. And you will bury any beauty that you try to create in your life if you don't do things properly. I want to focus your attention on choice. What I like to say is chores as opposed to work. Choice, chores, and commitment. The 3 C's for charcoal, chalk, and clay. I want to point out something here. This is something called the point within a circle flanked by 2 parallel lines. You might have seen it in some of the literature you've read. It's sometimes hanging up on some of the walls in some of the lodges around where you might visit. And this is a working tool. Let me show you. With just a simple change, I'm going to call it a flank circumpunct because it's so much easier than that long point within a circle flanked by 2 parallel lines, right? Flank circumpunct, a lot easier. I want to introduce you to what is called the divided circumpunct. And if you know all the materials that we just went over, you'll notice that they represent, or shall I say they are represented by the 4 classic elements. These are Greek. Air, fire, and earth. Air, the chalk. Fire, charcoal, earth, clay. And of course, you being alive represent the water, because water is essence of life. We go through that. They're your elements that you bring to the table when you're creating Masonic cement. Cement begins with an investment, and that investment is called virtue. What is virtue? Well, it's strengthening. It's strength. It's manly strength specifically, because if you look up all the roots, it's going to tell you manly strength. And if you know